Hi, everybody!
Normally, I don't talk about rumors, usually because they just don't interest me. It's also incredibly rare that any of them ever come to fruition. But this one does interest me, so we're going to talk about it, as it seems like Sony are interested in acquiring the gaming assets under the WB umbrella. There are other components to the deal that are related to stuff outside of gaming as well, namely HBO Max. But since this channel doesn't cover normal entertainment, we're going to ignore that, but it was worth mentioning, as that's probably what Sony is most interested in for this particular deal. The gaming assets are just an added benefit. Before we get into my thoughts on the matter, we need to give a little bit of context regarding this rumor. WB is seemingly interested in spinning off their gaming assets into a totally separate company, and a website that isn't commonly known, going by the name of SE Scoops, posted some supposed insider information regarding Sony's interests. If it was just that site giving the information, I would normally walk on by and not give a shit. However, given bigger sites like Push Square are reporting on it, I think there may be some merit to it after all. Whether anything bears fruit is another question, and one I'm not qualified to answer. However, I do think it's worth exploring just a little bit, since some of the assets in question heavily relate to some of what PlayStation is starting to focus on far more, specifically fighting games. Because you have to remember WB's gaming assets encompass NetherRealm Studios, which covers games like Mortal Kombat and the Injustice titles. How does this relate to Sony and their fighting game stuff, though? Look no further than their latest State of Play. During that event, they revealed Marvel Tokon, which they are helping Arc System Works develop. They're also releasing the PlayStation Defiant, which is a first-party fight stick. I do have videos covering those topics, so check the description and pinned comment if those videos interest you, as I really do think they're informing some future business decisions Sony might make. But fighting games are always going to be a very small component of what PlayStation produces, because fighting games are always going to be a very small subgenre of game, considering they tend to not have mass appeal anymore. They did when arcades were the big thing in gaming, but that bubble burst in the early 2000s, and fighting games and other arcade titles have mostly been on the decline since, with some small cases where they become obscenely popular, with something like a Marvel fighting game or something like Mortal Kombat or an Injustice title's release. Also, since Sony is heavily involved with EVO, making it effectively a Sony-run event, it makes sense as to why they'd be interested in at least NetherRealm Studios. But there are other assets they would be interested in, such as the Batman Arkham games, along with the other DC superhero properties. Plus, WB Games have access to things like the Nemesis system and one IP I won't mention for fear of getting cancelled. If you know, you know. Okay, so I've outlined some of the things PlayStation might benefit from this potential acquisition. But why would Warner Brothers spin off this asset, which would then be bought up by other companies? Mostly it comes down to how poorly WB have been managing their gaming assets. Just look at how poorly some of their games have performed in recent times. They actually lost money thanks to games like Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, and have shut down many of their more interesting studios like Monolith Soft, meaning the value of these assets are at an all-time low. Mortal Kombat 1, for example, while it sold obscene numbers, was ultimately not as profitable as hoped, and some of the planned DLC was cancelled, meaning a restructuring of the company is needed, which is why they're supposedly getting spun off and gaining independence from their parent company, making them a perfect buy low candidate for any prospective buyers. PlayStation could then swoop in and rehabilitate the company, while also acquiring the rights to a lot of very strong IPs in the process, making their portfolio of games that much stronger. So, let's get into what my thoughts on this rumor actually are. I'll straight up say it, I do not put a lot of faith into this rumor, given it's coming from a very unknown source. They could literally just be making things up to get clicks, but I do think it's really interesting, given Sony could then benefit from things like the Nemesis system, which is a patented technology from WB Games, so only they are allowed to use it. I think PlayStation could also benefit from implementing the Nemesis system in some of their games if this deal does go through. It could really work in games similar to Ghost of Tsushima, the Horizon games, God of War, and a couple of others. I also think Sony would desperately want a developer like NetherRealm in-house, as they could really bolster their push into fighting games. Then if Batman and other DC superheroes end up being part of the deal, then PlayStation would really benefit from that, since they already have a strong showing with their Spider-Man games, and soon their release of Wolverine, which should be sometime next year. But I don't think this deal is going to go through. Warner Brothers is currently restructuring WB Games, which makes sense given they had a lot of failures in recent times. But the executives at Warner Brothers, while they may have mishandled their gaming division recently, they aren't entirely stupid. They know the properties they have access to are highly valuable, and they would be stupid to let those go. Plus, streaming assets like HBO Max are money makers when they have new exciting shows. So again, Warner Brothers isn't going to want to lose out on that revenue. As a whole, this acquisition is interesting if it happens, but the cards are stacked against it. As such, I think the chances of it happening are as high as the Toronto Maple Leafs winning a cup in my lifetime. It isn't going to happen. But what do you think of this rumor? If you've made it this far into the video, consider hitting the subscribe button. Now check out my video discussing studios I think Sony might acquire this generation. And until next time, keep blazing that trail.